Okay, right. So today we are continuing our study on the Abomination of Desolation, the end time fulfillment. This is part 2. We are identifying what the Abomination of Desolation is at the end time, that is during our time. Right? So let's get into our study. Now, in our last study, we saw that Mrs. White compared the siege of Jerusalem, that is by the Roman legions or armies, with the future national Sunday law in the United States. So the Abomination of Desolation is actually the national Sunday law that will take place in the future. We noticed that there was a connection between the Roman eagle standard, that is their Roman flag, the sun standard, and the Great Seal of the United States of America, right? Which both contain an eagle and a sunburst. We also noticed that as the eagle, sun standards of the Romans were the sign that God's faithful followers when they saw the sign, they were to flee Jerusalem. Now, in the same way, when the United States, the country represented by the eagle, imposes a national Sunday law or the day of the sun, it will be a sign that we are nearing the end and that God's people need to flee from the cities to the hills and secluded places. Now, this leads us to ask a very important question. Is it really the same for the Roman legions to worship the literal sun god as it is for Protestants in the United States and the rest of the world at that time to worship on the day of the sun? Are these two things the same, right? Because the legions worship the sun god through their standard. Is it the same to worship on Sunday? Is it the same that when you worship on Sunday, is it the same as the Roman legions worshipping their standard? Some may say these are two different things, but let us look at it closely, right? The answer, when we look at it closely, the answer is in the principle, right? Is the principle the same? Now, if in many things in the Bible, in most things, God gives us the principle, right? And we apply it to the situation. All principles that we need to live by are given to us in the Bible by God, right? So we apply the principle to the situation. So in this same case, let's do that. Now the question is, first question, who created the sun? Obviously, God did, right? Did he create it as an object of worship? No, he did not, right? So it's a secular object. It's to give us light, right? To give us heat, to give us light. So now what happens if we make the sun an object of worship? What would we call that? We call that idolatry, right? Because when we take a normal thing that God didn't create for worship and turn it into something that we worship, it becomes idolatry, right? It becomes an idol in our life. Now, the next question is, who created the first day of the week? Now we are trying to apply the principle. They're trying to understand the principle and apply it. Is the Roman standard and the national Sunday law the same, right? Now, the next question is, who created the first day of the week? Obviously, God did, right? The Bible tells us so in Genesis chapter 1. Now, did he create the first day of the week for worship? No. We are told in Exodus that we are supposed to work 6 days and rest on the 7th. So then Sunday becomes a secular day of work for all of us, right? Now, God created a day of worship where we were supposed to worship, which is the Sabbath on the 7th day, right? So the 7th-day Sabbath is a day that is set aside by resting on it for us to worship. But the first day is a day that we work on. Now, so what happens if you make the first day of the week a day of worship? Like the sun, if you take a common object and use it for worship, it becomes idolatry. Because anything that man makes for worship, that God did not make for worship, is idolatry. It doesn't matter if it's an object or if it's a day. if man makes it for worship, something that God did not make for worship, then it becomes idolatry, right? When God didn't involve it as, create it as an object or a day of worship, it becomes idolatry. So we see that the Protestants in the United States embraced Sunday, worship on the day of the sun, from papal Rome, as papal Rome had previously embraced it from pagan Rome. Thus, there is an unbroken chain that joins pagan Rome, papal Rome, and apostate Protestantism in the United States. Sun worship came from pagan Rome, it came to papal Rome brought it to the United States. Apostate Protestantism accepted it as a day of worship. Now, to provide an outline of the historical process of the transfer of Sunday as a day of worship from ancient Babylon to apostate Protestantism in the world, let's go through a set of sequences quickly, right? So that we understand this clearly in our mind. First, ancient Babylon transferred sun worship to Pergamon, which is a city in Asia Minor. Remember, we studied this when we were doing the churches, right? So ancient Babylon transfers sun worship to Pergamon. Now, Pompey, who is the general of the Roman legions, on a military expedition to Asia Minor, where the sun worship was transferred to Pergamon, in BC 63, he adopted the sun god Mithra as the protector of the Roman legion, right? So Pompey goes to Asia Minor in 63 BC and he adopts the sun god Mithra as the protector of the Roman legions. Thus, Mithra became a special god for the Roman legions of the Roman Empire. So can you see how sun worship is coming? Came from pagan Rome to Pergamon, from Pompey goes to Asia Minor, and he adopts sun worship from their god, the sun god Mithra. Now, in spite of the fact that the New Testament teaches that Jesus and the apostles kept 7-day Sabbath, the early church fathers began to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus on Sunday in the early 2nd century, right? They kept the 7th day, but they celebrated the Sunday. Then we find Constantine, Emperor Constantine, who was a pagan and who worshipped the sun god as Deus Sol Invictus, that is the invincible sun. He merged Protestantism with Christianity. Now, by merging the worship of the sun god with the observance of Sunday in honor of the resurrection, right? Now, being a shrewd and opportunistic politician that he was, Constantine, he knew that in order to govern the Roman Empire, he had to gain the support of the Christians because Christians had grown phenomenally. The Christian church had grown phenomenally. So he had needed their support. So he merged the two in order to unify the empire. He proclaimed the first civil Sunday law in 321 AD. Okay? Let's read this Sunday law, how it is proclaimed. It is up there. He proclaimed the first Sunday law in AD 321. Would someone like to read this law, this first civil law that came into being?
On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not suitable for grain sowing or vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. So, Crispus, and Constantine, being consults, each of them the second time. I did not read that, no.
Right, that is the Codex Justinus from where it is taken, right? So
Okay.
we find that the civil law, now Constantine is an emperor, so he enacts a civil law. This law became a religious law in the Council of Laodicea in 336 AD, right? So we see that it didn't take long for Constantine's civil law to become a religious law by the church, enacted by the church in the Council of Laodicea in the year 336 AD. So, and we find these words. Let's read that.
The civil law became religious law in the Council of Laodicea in 336 AD. Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day. And if they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema from Christ.
Right, so now that became a church law, right? So the church now is saying that we should not keep the Sabbath because that's for the Jews. And the word anathema there means a curse from Christ, right? So now in just a few years from AD 321 to AD 336, we find Constantine, after Constantine gives a civil law, it becomes a religious church law. So this is how Sunday worship comes in. It was not from the Bible, but politically, we find that it has come into the church. The civil law became a religious law. Okay, now papal Rome, when we find that papal Rome, because it was during this time, papal Rome was rising, papal Rome then fully embraced Sunday as the day of worship. Roman Catholics have sunbursts everywhere in everything that they do, right? On churches, statues, works of art, chalices, vestments, etc. The Bible refers to this transfer of Sunday from pagan Rome to papal Rome and eventually to the Protestants in the United States. Now, this was actually predicted in Daniel 7:25, where Daniel speaks of a little horn, which is a symbol of the papacy, as we have studied, that it thought it could change God's times and laws. Now, does the papacy claim to have changed God's law? Absolutely, they are not embarrassed or shy about saying it. They quite openly say so, right? Now, if we are to look at a catechism, we find that in the Roman Catholic Catechism, the second commandment doesn't appear. What does the second commandment say? It says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Don't worship idols. Don't bow before images, right? So the Roman Catholic churches, if any of us have gone into them, we'll find that they have images, right? With their images, they couldn't keep this commandment in their catechism because people would ask questions, right? Why do you have images in your church and in your cathedral? So what did they do? So we find that in Roman Catholicism that they actually eliminate it from their catechism, the second commandment, and then of course you end up with only 9 commandments. So what do? They divide the 10th commandment into 2. However, it was more serious than this. The papacy claims that they changed the day of worship from Sabbath, Saturday Sabbath, 7th-day Sabbath to first day Sunday. Actually, they inherited it from pagan Rome, from the pagan Roman Empire. The pagan Roman Empire, through Pompey, inherited it from ancient Babylon. Remember, because the Pergamon, the priests from ancient Babylon came to Pergamon and brought with them these worship cultures of theirs, right? Then Sunday, as a day of worship, was transferred to the New World, to the United States, by the Puritans, right? The ones who left and went to America because of persecution. Now, Protestants claim to keep Sunday in honor of the resurrection of Christ. The Puritans transferred this observance of Sunday from Europe to the United States. Then colonial America strictly enforced Sunday observance, enacting something that is called the Blue Laws, that punished those who did not comply with civil penalties. Now, this was during colonial America, right? Thus, Protestants did exactly what they learned from the papacy in Europe. And that was what they ran away from, the persecution, but they didn't change their day of worship. And they persecuted those who didn't. Then they forced them to keep Sunday as the Sabbath. So the church, employing the power of the state to legislate religious observance. So we see that the church employs the power of the state to impose legislation, right, to observe religious observances. Now, and at least in 3 colonies of colonial America, there was a death sentence for those who did not keep what they call the Lord's Day. So that's the way that Sunday came into Protestantism, right? Now, Protestantism did not complete the Reformation, right? Protestantism went a long ways from the Catholic Church, but they conserved some of the information, some of the practices they kept that they were not able to discard. Now, papacy tells us, as we noticed in our last study, that the United States will repudiate its constitution by the Council of Apostate Protestantism and once again enforce a national Sunday law, as happened during the colonial period. Okay, now we would probably be thinking that this could never happen. But if you do not think so, do not remember that in our study 16 of this series, we're going to study how this could take place, right? So we are going to see that prophecy does fulfill, and we are going to see how prophecy will fulfill. Okay, so remember that. Study number 16, don't miss it. Be there. Okay, now we have seen this in history, and is there evidence in the Bible of this? Now we just saw this in history, how Babylon to pagan Rome, from pagan Rome to papal Rome, from papal Rome through the Puritans, from Europe to America, the Sunday was transferred. Now we've seen it in history, but is there evidence in the Bible of this transfer from pagan Rome to papal Rome to Protestantism? Now here there is biblical evidence, right, of the transfer of Sunday observance from pagan Rome to papal Rome and then to papal apostate Protestantism, right? Revelation 13, 1 to 2. I think we studied this when we studied the book of Revelation. We find there the dragon, which is pagan Rome, who attempted to kill the man-child, that is Jesus, right? Satan, through Herod, wanted to kill Jesus, gave the beast his throne. Now remember when we studied, like I said, studied Revelation 12, we were introduced to the dragon. Now the dragon primarily represents Satan. But the dragon that stands next to the man-child, that is when Jesus was born, who is about to be born, represents Satan working through the civil powers of the Roman Empire. Who was the civil power at that time? Herod, right? Now, in other words, the dragon is Satan, but Satan operates through civil powers in the world. So this dragon that tried to slay the man-child in chapter 12 of Revelation, right? We find that the child escapes from the dragon's hands and finally is taken up to God and is thrown, that is Jesus' ascension. And the dragon, which represents the Roman Empire as an instrument of Satan, now transfers his seat and power to the beast. Okay, the beast. Let's read about the beast. Let's read Revelation 13 verses 1 and 2.
Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name. Now the beast that I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him, same dragon that attempted to kill the male child, his power his throne and great authority.
So the dragon gives his seat and his power to the beast, right? Now, Revelation 12, 13, and 14. Now, the beast is the little horn, right? Now, we are aware of that, right? Then assume the power of the dragon. And the papacy, the little horn, ruled for 1,260 years. During this time, the little horn thought to change God's law by replacing the Sabbath with Sunday. He is the same beast that rules for 42 months, according to Revelation 13, 5 to 6, right? We have done that. We are just refreshed. Is this the same little horn of Daniel 7 that rules for times and a dividing up times? Yes, right? Now notice that the dragon transferred his seat and its power to the beast, that is the papacy. Then the papacy, the beast or the little horn, thinks to change God's law, and the Catholic Church says, we did it. We were the ones who implemented Sunday as the day of rest. Okay. Now then we find that another stage in Revelation chapter 13 is that there is this beast that gives his power and authority to a second beast. So we find that the papacy now gives its power and his authority to another beast, right? That rises in Revelation 13, 11 to 18. And that beast rises from the earth. And we have studied this before. We found that it represents the United States of America. It says it has two horns like a lamb, but ends up speaking like the dragon, because the dragon has transferred his authority and power to this second beast. So we have a dragon which represents the pagan Roman Empire. It gives its seat, its power and authority to the beast of the papacy, the beast of papacy, which is papal Rome, that rules for 1,260 years, which thinks that they can change God's law by changing the day of worship. And then we have this beast giving its authority and power to this other beast that rises up from the earth, which is the United States of America. We have identified that in a different study. So there's been a transfer of authority from pagan Rome to papal Rome to apostate Protestantism in the United States. Now in Revelation 13:11, we find these words regarding the second beast that we have been talking about, right? So the beast from the earth, like I said, is a symbol of the United States, will yet exercise all authority of the first beast. The first beast is the little horn, and speak like the dragon, because it's the dragon who gives his power to the first beast, right? Let's read Revelation 13:11.
Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon.
Okay, notice that the dragon is involved in all these stages, right? Papal Rome, it says the dragon tried to slay the male child. Then the dragon gives his seat and power and authority to the beast, first beast. And then the first beast, that is Papal Rome, rules for 1,260 years. So who is behind? Who is the power behind this? The pagan Rome, Papal Rome, the first beast. And the second beast is the dragon. Now, incidentally, if you notice in Revelation chapter 12, after the child escapes, means after Jesus has ascended, Revelation 12, 13, and 14, we find that the beast, the little horn, then assume the power of the dragon and rules for 1,260 years. So who is the driving force between these beasts? Is the dragon, and the dragon we know is Satan, right? So during this time, the little horn thought to change God's law, that is, replace the 7-day Sabbath with Sunday worship. So let's read Revelation 12, 13, and 14.
Now, when the dragon, Satan working through papal Rome, saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness of her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent.
Now we are clear that the woman here represents the church. The woman, before the child is born, God has only one church, but two stages. Before the child was born is the Old Testament, after the child born is New Testament, right? So the woman, the church, had to flee into the wilderness where she was for 1,260 years, because the dragon tried to slay the woman. So it's the dragon, by using the whom he gave his seat and power to papal robe, is trying to destroy God's church, right? And then we are told that the beast that rises from the earth is going to speak like a dragon. So the dragon is in all stages. It gives his seed to the beast from the sea. That beast is also called the dragon in Revelation chapter 12. And then that dragon beast gives its power and its authority to the beast that rises from the earth, which is Protestant America. Okay, Protestant America. Is that clear how this Sunday worship is being transferred? We saw it in history. Now we have seen it in scripture as well, right? I hope that is clear, because we need to be clear what we are studying. Now, how do we know that the beast that rises from the earth rules by the power of the first beast? Good question, right? In other words, how do we know that this beast that speaks like a dragon continues to do the work of the beast that existed before Revelation chapter 30, right? The evidence speaking about this beast that rises from the earth, it says it exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence. Everything it does is for the first beast. Now, this is talking about the United States apostate Protestant, right? It bears nothing that the land beast does everything. Now, it bears noting that the land beast does everything in honor and to impress the first beast. Okay? So what does it do? It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence. Remember, the first beast gave him his power and authority. So he exercises that in the presence of the first beast. It causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, right? So this second beast, United Apostate Protestant America, will cause the citizens of the world to worship the first beast. It performs signs in the sight of the first beast or on behalf of the first beast, as the NIV verse translation tells us. So it performs signs on behalf of the first beast. It makes an image of the first beast. It makes an image to the first beast. And it imposes the mark of the beast. Now, the mark of the beast is imposing of Sunday worship, right? Worship on Sunday. So very clearly, this beast from the earth is continuing the work of the previous beast, which is the first beast or papal robe. And the previous beast is continuing the work of pagan Rome. Okay? So this is how Sunday was transferred from Babylon to pagan Rome, through Pompeii, through Pergamum to Pompeii, and then from pagan Rome to papal Rome, to Constantine, and then from the papacy through the Puritans to the United States of America, to the Protestant denominations in the United States of America, and of course, across the world. Okay? Now, we see as we study that Protestants never totally severed their relationship with the mother church from which they came, that is the Roman Catholic Church. That is why John O'Brien, the author of 45 books, and for many years a theology professor of the University of Notre Dame, challenged the Protestants in his book, The Faith of the Millions, page 400 and 401. Let's read that.
But since Saturday not Sunday is specified in the Bible. Isn't it curious that non-Catholics who profess to take their religion directly from the Bible and not from the church observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Yes, of course, it is inconsistent, but this change was made about 15 centuries before Protestantism was born, and by that time the custom was universally observed. They have continued the custom even though it rests upon the authority of the Catholic Church and not upon the explicit text in the Bible. That observance remains as a reminder of the Mother Church, from which the non-Catholic sects broke away, like a boy running away from home, but still carrying in its pocket a picture of his mother, or a rock, or a lock, or her hair.
Right, so he's challenging the Protestants, right? And this is because Protestantism never discarded everything that was anti-biblical that was found in Roman Catholic. Now, two great doctrines that the Protestants still continue from Catholicism is one is the idea of the immortality of the soul, and the other is the idea that Sunday is the day that you're supposed to keep. Sunday had become so entrenched that Protestants said it's useless for us to try and re-establish the Sabbath, even though it is based on non-biblical authority. So they just went with the flow. They didn't bother to stop and go back to the Bible. So immortality of the soul and the Sunday worship was something that came from Catholicism, which they are continuing to do so even today. Now, Mrs. White agreed with O'Brien that the Roman Catholic papacy bequeathed Sunday worship to the Protestants. Now, there are several statements that we're going to read. First, let's read from Review and Herald, April 15, 1880.
But the question of Sabbath and Sunday observance is to be agitated everywhere, and the deceptions of Satan will flood the world. The man of sin has instituted a spurious Sabbath, and the Protestant world has taken this child of the papacy and cradled and nurtured it. Satan means to make all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of the fornication of Babylon.
Okay. Now, just to clarify, the man of sin that is spoken of here is the same as the first beast, is the same as the little horn, is the same as the harlot, it's the same as the abomination of desolation, it's the same as Antichrist, it's the same as the king of the north, right? Different names used for the same Roman Catholic papal system. Okay, so those are the names. So here it's referred to as the man of sin. Let's read another statement from Signs of the Time, June 12, 1893.
When the land which the Lord provided as an asylum for his people, that they might worship him according to the dictates of their own consciences, the land over which for long years the shield of omnipotence has been spread, the land which God has favored by making it the depository of the pure religion of Christ. When that land shall, through its legislators, abjure the principles of Protestantism and give countenance to Romish apostasy in tampering with God's law, it is then that the final work of the man of sin will be revealed. Protestants will throw their whole influence and strength on the side of the papacy. By a national act enforcing the false Sabbath, they will give life and vigor to the corrupt faith of Rome, reviving her tyranny and oppression of conscience. Then it will be time for God to work in mighty power for the vindication of his truth.
Wow, right? So clearly she agrees with them that this is not biblical, right? Now, in the final fulfillment of the abomination of desolation, now we are clear that the abomination of desolation is the Sunday law, the national Sunday law. Okay, we have found that out from the Bible, and we have found it out, connected it through history as well. The sign of God's people to flee from the cities will be the national Sunday law, right? The nation whose emblem is an eagle with a sunburst above its head will impose the day of worship that it received from the papacy from pagan Rome and pagan Rome from ancient Babylon. This decree will bear the great seal of the United States of America. Now, when God's true people see this sign, not only Seventh-day Adventists, but those in all the churches, when they see this sign, and it is explained to them clearly, they will flee from the city, and the whole world will choose to be in one of two groups, right? The world will be polarized into two groups. Sadly, most of those who claim to follow God will end up on the wrong side. Idolatry will be the great sign of the rebellious world. Sadly, most of the people are going to go along with ignoring the sign of God. And like we saw in ancient Jerusalem, when it was destroyed, over 1 million odd people died or were taken captive because they didn't understand the sign or refused to accept the sign, right? Okay, now let's talk about the idle Sabbath that Mrs. White talks. Now, Mrs. White refers to Sunday as the idle Sabbath. In what sense is this true? Remember, we reviewed this at the beginning of our study series. How can you call, of today's study actually, how can you call Sunday the idle Sabbath? Let's read one statement from Mrs. White, found in volume 19 of Manuscript Releases, page 244.
Among professed Christians, there are idolaters, men and women who are not sealed by God. Many have subverted the Christian faith into idolatry, giving to a man-made institution the glory and honor that God requires for his Sabbath day, and compelling others to worship this idol. Such ones will surely be visited with God's retributive judgments, which are to be poured out without mixture of mercy upon the unrepentant despisers of God's law.
Okay, now let's be clear. There are many Christians that don't understand these issues right now, right? If they don't understand these issues, they don't have the opportunity of knowing well, right? They might practice idolatry without knowing it. God only holds us accountable for what we could have known and chose to reject, right? So there are many faithful Christians in all these churches, and when they hear this message, when the loud cry under the power of the latter rain goes out, they will hear and they will accept and they will come out. Now, God is particular about his day of worship. Emphasis is God is particular. Man cannot treat with impunity the holy as it were common, and the common as if it were holy. When God says that the seventh day is the Sabbath and that we must keep it holy, he means the seventh day, not the first or the fifth or the third, right? Jesus said to the religious leaders of his day, in vain they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Mark 7:7. Okay. Now let's go through where God seriously, go through a few stories where God very seriously takes, is very serious about not using the common with the holy, right? There are many stories in the Bible, but let's just look at some. The following stories illustrate how zealously God regards the distinction between the holy and the common. So if he was so particular about it then, be sure he's particular about it now, even in our worship services, right? Take, for instance, Nadab and Abihu, who offered common fire in place of holy. Now, these were Aaron's sons. They were priests. They knew what they were doing. The Bible tells us that these sons of Aaron, instead of taking the holy fire from the altar to mix it with incense, to take it into the presence of the Lord, they took ordinary common fire. Now, what did God say? Who cares? The fire is fire, one fire burns the same as another fire will burn. The chemical compositions are the same or alike. No. That when God said fire from the altar, he meant fire from the altar. That fire was holy, okay? Even though all other fires look similar or looked alike, right? that particular fire was holy, and that particular fire is what Aaron and his Nadab and Abihu was supposed to use, right? Not anything common. And what happened to those two men? Fire came from the presence of the Lord and devoured them because they were openly going against what God had clearly told them. Then we find Uzzah. Now, Uzzah also was a Levite. He was well aware that he was not supposed to touch the ark. It was holy, right? Even with good intentions. To begin with, David should never have taken the ark on a cart, because God had given specific instructions how to carry the ark, right? Now, that's a different story. But here we find Uzzah going on the side. When the ark was going, of course, they didn't have tar paved roads then. So we are told that the story of this, right? God had told the priests of Israel, don't touch the ark. He had told the Levites, don't touch the ark. But David was bringing the ark back to Jerusalem. It looked kind of shaky. It looked like it was going to fall off the cart. So Uzzah, with all good intentions, reached out to touch the ark to stop it from falling. Well, someone might say he had good intentions. He didn't want it to fall. Yes, many people who keep Sunday have good intentions. But what did the Bible say? The Bible says that Uzzah, on the spot, dropped dead, because he clearly went against a clear command of God. Do not touch the ark. Okay, he was a Levite. He knew very clearly why God said it and what the reason was, right? Then we have Ananias and Sapphira, right, who sold their plot of land, promised to give, but kept back a portion of the holy money that they promised to give God, right? What happened to the two of them? When they kept part of it to themselves, they came and lied, and then they also dropped dead. So God is very serious. When he says something, he means it, right? Then what about Korah, who coveted a holy vocation that God had not called him to? Now, Korah was a prince. He wanted to be a priest. God never called him to be a priest. But what happened to him? Remember Korah, right? He was a Levite, but he wanted to be a priest. He wanted a different function. God had established that the holy priesthood, which had to be composed of Levites, but had to be from the tribe of Aaron. What happened to Korah when he rebelled against it? Because he aspired to a holy office that did not belong to him. The Bible tells us that the earth opened up and swallowed him along with his family. Is God serious about something when he says? Then we have Jeroboam up there, who sanctified a rival priesthood and a worship center. Jeroboam tried to sanctify a priesthood in the place of worship other than Jerusalem, and he suffered dearly for not doing things the way God said he was supposed to do, right? Then what about Belshazzar, who used holy sanctuary vessels for a common banquet to drink wine from, right? On that fateful night of Babylon, we find Belshazzar taking holy vessels, treating them as they were common utensils, right? Putting wine in them for the princes of Babylon to drink. Did God ignore? Certainly not, right? So God, according to the Bible, is particular. When he says this is 7 days holy, he means. Some people think that God has had a conversion experience and that now God is not particular, not in 2024, not in the 21st century. He doesn't really care how you worship. He doesn't care what kind of music we use in the church for worship. He doesn't care how we come clothed to church to worship, as long as our hearts are sincere. As long as you give the Lord what you think you should give him. Well, that is not the case. God is particular. When he says that the 7th day is the Sabbath, he means just that, the 7th day. He doesn't mean on any other day. Okay? Now, this is from the Bible, and this we can apply to all our worship, right? In our day. Now, interesting topic to go on. We're going to read a couple of interesting articles and paragraphs that appeared during the period of the pandemic, the corona pandemic, right? Now, why are we reading all these statements? Well, we have already noticed the biblical and historical foundation for this idea of the transfer of Sunday from Babylon to pagan Rome, to papal Rome, and then to apostate Protestants. We also notice in scripture how this took place, right? How the dragon gave his seat and authority to the beast, and then the beast ruled for 1,260 years. Then it gives its power to the second beast that rises in Revelation 13. And that beast imposes the mark of the beast, which is worshipping on the first day of the week. But now we want to notice what is being said today, right? Not many centuries ago, but today in this in 20s, in the 20s of 2020s, right? We all know how the pandemic caused terrible havoc in the lives of people. Many died around the world, businesses shut down, countries went into debt or bankruptcy. It was terrible, and we are still feeling the effects of that, right? Even in our country, even today. Now, some people, some Christian Protestants have actually said that this pandemic should teach us that we need to take one day of the week off to rest and to let the environment rest. And of course, that may be a good thing, but what they're saying that one day of the week of rest is Sunday, right? We have studied this before, how Pope Francis I in his famous encyclical Laudatio Si says that the earth needs a rest, families need rest, workers need rest, and the world needs Sunday as a day of rest, okay? Now, just for a moment, pause, think, what's going to happen when things get really bad? Some might say, well, the corona was pretty bad. Yes, it was. But remember, Matthew 24 says, but wars, rumors of wars, nations rise against nations, kingdom against kingdom, and there's going to be pestilence. So we had corona, and there's going to be hunger. They say, today I was reading in the Gaza, people are dying of abject hunger, right? Famine, they're dying there before our very eyes, but people are fighting about that. And there's going to be earthquakes, we see that. And of course, we read the statement, Mrs. White, that there's going to be tsunamis, there's going to be tornadoes, there's going to be typhoons, there's going to be floods, and there's going to be fires. Now, we know that there is one fire raging even in the United States, in the Florida Panhandle, right? So these are already happening. But then what does Jesus say? These are the beginning of sorrow. It hasn't even started. So in other words, things are going to get worse. If people are saying, you know, the pandemic is a sign that we need to make Sunday the day of worship, what's going to happen when things get even worse? So we find that religious leaders, secular leaders have linked the corona pandemic with the need to observe Sunday. So we are going to read a couple of statements that we find, right? So that we understand the thinking of the Protestant world outside there. Because sometimes we as Adventists live in a cocoon. We go to work maybe in the church, we come back, we go to church. We don't know what's happening in the outside world. So we are a little bit out of touch with what's happening. So let's read this that appeared where this, okay, during the time of the pandemic, right? Okay, let's go ahead, read that.
Years ago, Sunday was a different day than the other 6 days of the week. Church parking lots were full. Store parking lots were empty and stores were closed. Occasionally, a gasoline station was open, but it was the exception instead of the rule. Even people who didn't go to church used Sunday for a day of rest and relaxation. Today, Sunday is not much different than the work week, except many stores don't open until noon. Maybe this time of enforced isolation will teach us something.
Okay, can you see how their thoughts are moving, right? That's very interesting. Let's read now. This is a Roman Catholic brother, Michael Venenzula, right? Let's see what he has to say.
This pandemic is the first calamity of global magnitude to have shaken the world this badly since the Second World War. And yet, a friend drew my attention today to reports that due to less travel and public activity, there's a lot less trash accumulating on streets, a lot less polluting in the air and water, and that for these few days, as the engines of manufacturing grind to a halt, the earth is getting the first real chance for rest and renewal that it has not had in decades. So, maybe one way to look at the current crisis is to see it as the planet's desperate demand for a Sabbath, a cessation from unbridled consumerism and the parasitic activity that work becomes when the pursuit of profit becomes its primary goal. Pope Francis has warned us that the global economy as it operates today often ends up generating profits at the expense of planet and the poor. So for this season of Lent, as we reflect on our sins and shortcomings in the light of God's mercy, we can ponder whether there are better ways of living and working that do not tax people and planet to their breaking points.
Okay, so once again, the planet has a desperate need for Sabbath. And as a Roman Catholic, he's not saying that it's the 7-day Sabbath. He's saying it's Sunday, because Christians today say Sunday is the Sabbath, right? So Sabbath is the 7th day of the week, Sunday is the first day of the week, but he's talking about Sunday, right? He says that earth desperately needs the Sabbath, the first day. Okay, another article by Leah Squid. Leah D, I hope I pronounced her name. Now she's the assistant professor of preaching and worship in Lexington Theological Seminar in Kentucky, a deeply ecumenical seminar. She wrote this article, an article titled When the Earth Demands Sabbath, Learning from the Corona Pandemic, Corn Preacher, April 1, 2022. And quoting here only in part, let's read what she has to say.
There are foundational questions we need to raise about our refusal to give the land and people rest, Sabbath, and the unrelating demands we make without consideration of the consequences. Ecological plagues. Would it be unbearable to have one day a week when everyone works and consumers alike get a day to rest? Can we understand the prudence of leaving forests and natural lands alone to live as God designed? Pharisees like planned economic slowdowns and intentional degrowth are coming to the fore. For those of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we know the Bible was way ahead of the game with this concept of planned economic slowdown. It is called Sabbath.
Now, she's not talking once again about the 7-day Sabbath. She's talking about Sunday, right? The first day of the week, as a solution to global problems that we have today with the environment and during the pandemic, right? Now, this is their way of thinking. Just listen to what they're saying. Now, these remarks were made by Mayor Cam Guthrie from Goodlove, Ontario in America. And see, once again, he's not talking about the 7-day Sabbath, but rather Sunday version, right?
Families are eating meals and together that they rarely did before. Cities known for constant noise and chaos are quiet. Birds can be heard singing in the street of Hyderabad, India. The waters around Venice are clear. You can actually see the fish and swans are returning. The air quality in major cities such as Los Angeles, in London has improved 80%. It is no longer visible, but rather clean and breathable. Perhaps the Creator is telling us that society and the planet needs to keep a Sabbath every week.
Okay, so now they're all pushing for Sunday, right? Sunday to be a day of worship, right? Now, Mrs. White predicted that the religious world would blame God's people for the calamities that afflict the earth. She also predicted that nations would oppose the Sunday law would propose the Sunday law to restore divine favor and temporal prosperity. Mrs. White wrote that eventually those who observe Sunday and push for a national Sunday law will persecute those who observe the Sabbath. Seems unlikely today in the United States around the world, right? Especially the United States, because their First Amendment in their Constitution says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or forbidding the free exercise thereof. But prophecy tells us that it will happen, and we can trust prophecy to be correct. Let's read what Mrs. White says in Great Controversy, page 590.
The class that had provoked the displeasure of heaven will charge all their troubles upon those whose obedience to God's commandments is a perpetual reproof to transgressors. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced, and that those who present the claims of the fourth commandment, thus destroying reverence for Sunday, are troublers of the people, preventing their restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity.
So if any one of you stop and listen to what's happening in the United States today, in their legislature, even in their judiciary, we wouldn't be surprised. You know, prophecy is clearly starting to take place there. Now I'm going to read, I will read this. I'm going to read this. I'm reading it so that we will understand, right? I'm going to read a sermon by Pastor Robert Field. And he's talking about why people can't meet in church on a Sunday, right? And he calls it God took away the Sunday, right? He's saying because of this, God took away the Sunday, right? The worship that we had, that God sent the pandemic because people are not keeping Sunday like it. Now, he's from the Bethel Baptist Church in Montreal, right? And he says that God took away their ability to worship on Sunday during the pandemic because they are not keeping Sunday as they should. This is what he says. When we see a virus affecting the entire world, we know that he wants to get our attention in a very big way. This is a worldwide announcement from heaven. Yet rather than look at the infection as it affects the unsaved world, I want us to take a moment to consider what God may be preaching to his church, his people. Now here comes, he talks about Sunday being the Lord's Day. Sunday, the Lord's Day, is gone. God has taken it away, right? God. Sunday is not the Lord's Day. It's Saturday, as the Bible says, but it says Sunday. Understand God is in control of it all. It is during times like these that I like to ask the question, why God? Why are you trying to teach? What are you trying to teach your church? You see, we have to learn to turn away from our own needs and desires and fears for the moment and start a try to see things from God's perspective. Why would God take away Sunday? Yet why, God? Why have you taken Sunday away? He's asking God this question. In looking upon our present condition, I believe we should understand that the virus is a judgment upon the Lord's day. There are many reasons from God for the infection in our midst. Yes, I believe that this is one glaring fact to be seen in this trial. The church is closed. We are out of business. God has eradicated worship on his day. Once again, he's referring to Sunday. He has taken Sunday away. Yet for what reason? Surely he would want us to gather, singing and praying and hearing the word preached, doing all the things we used to do. Is it not what he desired for his people? How can this not this is this not what he desired for his people? How can he close down our corporate worship? I believe he's sending us a message that he has not been pleased with what we have been doing on his day of worship. Once again, Sunday. Therefore, he has shut it down for the time being, and perhaps we might get his message. Looking back on our past behavior, he goes on, do you think that we have really been honoring the Lord's Day and keeping it holy? Talking once again of Sunday. Do you really think that God is pleased with our obedience to his fourth commandment? God's fourth commandment says keep the seventh day, right? But he is referring to Sunday. Many in the church have eradicated the fourth commandment, right? He's getting his facts wrong. The fourth commandment says seventh day is the Sabbath, right? From the thought, we do not remember the Sabbath to keep it holy as God commands. Israel did this for their Sabbath in the Old Testament. Now he thinks the seventh day Sabbath is only for the Old Testament, and found themselves under the judgment of God. He took away their day of worship by sending them away into exile. Therefore, in seeing what is presently happening to the church, do we really think that God is pleased with the way we respond to his day? Once again, referring to Sunday. Try to see this from his perspective. What used to be the Lord's Day has now turned into the Lord's hour. We race to church, do our Christian duty, then head back to the world to enjoy ourselves with what is left of the day. Gone are the times of evening services, afternoon fellowships, solid and consistent and constant preaching, abstaining from work and playing on Sunday. So he's referring to the Sabbath as Sabbath as Sunday, right? So that we can enjoy the people of God and the Lord. Pastors reduce their preaching to once a week when the church is screaming for food as they starve. Sunday has become optional for Christians. So he says, if there is a party, a sporting event, a TV special, a baseball or hockey game, lawn to cut or windows to wash, then sure, we can opt out of church because we think that those events are more important and vital to our own pleasure. Surely God would not deny us just a little bit of fun, a little bit of pleasure or business on his day, once again referring to Sunday as his day. I hope you realize that the world, the flesh, and the devil have made a concerted effort in eradicating the importance of the Lord's Day from the church. And we have gone along with it. So he's saying we have gone along, right? Businesses thrive, sports events flourish. Christians think nothing about running after things of the world on his day, once again referring to Sunday. After all, one service a week is sufficient, is it not? I have done my duty to God, now let me do my thing. Thus our compromises have led us to judgment. The spiritual life of the church nowadays is full of compromise. Our people walk like the world, and these compromises, these weaknesses are accepted by the church. Then he goes on. You may not be convinced that Sunday is our Sabbath of the Lord. Okay, you got that wrong there. We may think that the fourth commandment has been abrogated, tossed away, of no concern for the Christian in this century. The fourth commandment clearly says, seventh day is the Sabbath. Yea, we fiddle around with arguments about the validity and application of the fourth commandment while the church burns to the ground under God's judgment. So he's saying God's judgment, right? We try to convince ourselves that it is an outdated commandment, inapplicable to us, unnecessary in these modern times, to constraining, asking too much for us. So with our superior excuses, we sit back and tell ourselves that God, that we are going to do as we please. He can have me for an hour for one sermon. And that is even enough, even though God demands the day. If that is our choice, then God will agree with us and give us up to our own lusts and desires. So he says, he has taken Sunday away, and we will not see the importance of his day. If we will not see the importance of his day, then he will eradicate it from us and the next generation, just as he did for Israel. Now, that sermon of his is full of inaccuracies. Sunday is not the Bible Sabbath. He has got that wrong from the word go. Nowhere has God told us to worship on Sunday, but rather Sunday is one of the 6 days we are supposed to worship, right? But the point that we need to see here is that he's arguing that the pandemic has taught us that we need to observe Sunday as a day of rest. And when things get really bad, as the Bible tells us, and Matthew 24 says, there's going to be a clamor from this group by the clergy, right? Saying we need to return to observing Sunday as the day of rest so that God can bless us once more, because they're saying God brought judgment of the pandemic on them because they were not keeping the Sunday as so they say, as he says. Now, as I said, as Seventh-day Adventists, we live in cocoons of our own, but we need to wake up and to see what's happening in apostate Protestant America, to know that prophecy is fulfilling before our very eyes, that these are the rumblings that will turn into huge earthquakes when the time is right. Now, let's read one more statement. This article is written by Mary Healy. It's on the corona pandemic. Is the corona pandemic a judgment from God? National Catholic Register, April 8, 2020, Mary Healy. Come on, let's read that.
Half the human race is under some form of lockdown, as if suddenly consigned to an involuntary retreat. Have we sometimes failed to honor the Lord by keeping the Lord's Day? Have we treated Sundays just like any other day, as a time to go shopping, get work done, and pursue our own agenda, instead of taking time to deepen our relationship with Jesus and relax with family and friends? In the Old Testament, God decreed that Judah would go into exile for a time corresponding to all the Sabbaths they had broken, until the land has retrieved its lost Sabbaths. 2 Chronicles 36:21. So now perhaps our fanatic society is retrieving its lost Sabbaths.
Can you see how they are, weaving in their own theories that are not biblical into what's happening, right? So this is the rumblings of the apostate Protestant churches, right? Now, like Israel, God chose the United States to fulfill his plan of guarding and spreading God's truth, right? It is a nation with worldwide influence, capable of taking the truth to every nation on earth. It has a constitution that guarantees civil and religious liberty to facilitate preaching in full freedom. However, when the United States, this nation, will repudiate the principles of the First Amendment to the Constitution and commit the greatest abomination, right? The greatest abomination is the Sunday law, right? The enforcement of Sunday as a national day of rest, God will write national apostasy in the heavenly book, right? Mrs. White wrote several statements about national apostasy leading up to national rule. Let's read a couple of them. The first is found in Review and Herald, May 2, 1893.
People of the United States have been a favored people, but when they restrict religious liberty, surrender Protestantism, and give countenance to popery, the measure of their guilt will be full, and national apostasy will be registered in the books of heaven.
What a solemn thought. Then last day events, page 133 and 134.
When a nation in its legislative council shall enact laws to bind the consciences of men in regard to their religious privileges, enforcing Sunday observance and bringing oppressive power to bear against those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath, the law of God will, to all intents and purposes, be made void in our land, and national apostasy, the abomination, will be followed by national ruin. That's the desolation.
Right. Then Mrs. White says in Review and Herald, June 15, 1897. Let's see what she says.
Roman Catholic principles, union of church and state, will be taken under the care and protection of the state. This national apostasy will speedily be followed by national ruin.
So in other words, the religious leaders of the United States are going to pressure the state they're going to pressure the government, the legislators for the National Sunday Law. Now, as you can see, the pandemic caused a slight rumbling. So the full earthquake or the full volcanic eruption it will take place, right? Because there are rumblings. Then let's read Counsels for the Church, page 335.
The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see whether the undercurrent is trending. Its professions are mild and apparently Christian, the two horns like a lamb, but when it shall speak, it will reveal the spirit of the dragon.
Right now it's, mild, right? Now, the same capital sin of Israel will characterize the Christian world, right? We have studied before that the sin that was committed by the Jewish nation, the abomination that led to the desolation or destruction, was that they rejected Jesus Christ, right? The sin of the religious world at the end of time will be discarding God's holy law, particularly the commandment that speaks about keeping the Sabbath. And if you listen to what we read just now from the Protestants outside there, and even the Catholics, they're quite convinced that Sunday is the day of worship, right? Though it's not biblical. Now, Mrs. White wrote in Great Controversy, page 22, the following quotation. Let's read that.
The great sin of the Jews was their rejection of Christ. The great sin of the Christian world would be their rejection of the law of God, the foundation of his government in heaven and earth.
So at first glance, the sin of Jews and the sin of the anti-Christians may seem different. However, they really are the same sin. The Jews were in love with the law, but they hated Jesus. They hated Christ. The Christians will claim to love Christ, but we hate his law. The law, as we have studied and we have found from the Bible, is a transcript of Christ's character. So if you reject the law, you are rejecting Jesus. If you reject Jesus, you are rejecting his law, right? So it's the same thing, different sides of a file. Selected Messages, volume 1, page 240. Mrs. White wrote this.
Christ is revealed in the law, which is a transcript of his character.
Very clear, right? Now, Mrs. White compared the desolation of Jerusalem with the desolation of the world. She linked what happened with Jerusalem and what's going to happen with the world at the end of time after the close of probation. This is when Jesus leaves the sanctuary. Let's see what she has to say in Great Controversy, page 640.
When he leaves the sanctuary, darkness covers the inhabitants of the earth. In that fearful time, the righteous must live in the sight of a holy God without an intercessor. The restraint which has been upon the wicked is removed, and Satan has entire control of the finally impenitent. God's long suffering has ended. The world has rejected his mercy, despised his love, and trampled upon his law. The wicked have passed the boundary of their probation. The Spirit of God, persistently resisted, has been at last withdrawn. Unsheltered by divine grace, they have no protection from the wicked one. Satan will then plunge the inhabitants of the earth into one great final trouble. As the angels of God cease to hold in check the fierce winds of human passion, all the elements of strife will be let loose. The whole world will be involved in ruin more terrible than that which came upon Jerusalem of old. Amen.
Now, if you look around the world today, we think that things are terrible, right? Pretty terrible. But what's going to happen? Matthew 24 clearly tells us that when the entire world, America, beginning with America and the world, is under the control of Satan, except for the righteous, those who are sealed. Just imagine what it's going to be if now the God is still holding the winds of strife. So if we need to know what happened to Jerusalem of old, we need to go to the book Great Controversy and read the first chapter. And we may wonder how things could get worse than that, right? That in that chapter where Mrs. White describes, she says, that the whole world will be involved in doing more terrible than that which came upon Jerusalem of old. So read that so that we get an idea of how things will be. Now God calls us to be obedient to his holy law, all of it, not changed, unchanged, but as it is written, 7 days is Sabbath, it's Sabbath. God, when God says something, he means it, and he takes it very seriously, like we saw with those characters that we saw that went against what God told them to do plainly. He wants us to keep his Sabbath, not as an obligation, but because we love to spend the entire day with him, right? So it is love that will motivate us to keep the Sabbath, and nobody will need to tell us to keep the Sabbath because we will be happy to keep the Sabbath, but we will keep the correct Sabbath, which is the 7-day Sabbath as given to us by Jesus himself in the Bible. It was not to the Jews, it was given to mankind, it was given to Adam and to Adam's race, right? So there's no need to get entangled in that it's for the Jews. No, the Jews were not there when the Sabbath was given. It was given to Adam's race, which we are all of.